Hello and welcome to the first of many high-quality podcasts. I am one half of your hosting duo. My name is John.
My name is Nick.
We are both engineers. We've known each other since middle school. We go way back, and we don't talk nearly as much as we used to. And this podcast is in part hopefully going to serve as a means for us to communicate on a more regular basis and also discuss various things that may have interested us in the last month or week or whatever happened to tickle our fancy recently. Some things like that might include political issues, scientific things, what the
Giraffes.
hell Donald Trump is doing with his life. Such things as that. Yeah. Why don't we just dive in, Nick?
We have a lot of stuff slated today. Let's see. Where do we want to start, really? I think I'll start off with Donald Trump's tax returns. And the reason I want to go over this is I feel like it's becoming too common with people to just read the headline and take it at face value for what it is. With this thing, a lot of the headlines all said Trump paid $38 million in income tax on $150 million of income. Well, there's a lot more to the story than just that, so I want to kind of lay it out for you based off of what was on Rachel Maddow's show and what the journalist who received the tax forms said about them. So, the form was the 1040 form, which is the individual tax return form, which can be filed jointly. 2005 was the year that Mr. Trump married Melania, so they filed a joint 1040 tax return.
Assuming Melania's included on this tax return that Rachel Maddow had, right?
Yes, her name is on it. You can see it as well. It's on DCR Report's website. It is linked. If you care to go there, dcrreport.org. So I'm doing the best I can to paraphrase this because there's a lot of stuff that happened on that show. So Trump's 1040 tax return was anonymously dropped off to journalist David K. Johnston's office. To make sure you're aware, it was not illegally obtained because it was not solicited and no one was coerced into giving that 1040 tax form to him. Keep in mind also, many months ago, the New York Times published his 1995 tax returns, also obtained anonymously. So David K. Johnston, you probably don't know who he is. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who specializes in economic and tax issues. He also authored the book The Making of Donald Trump that came out in August of last year, and he's been reporting on Donald Trump since 1988. So whoever dropped this 1040 form off knew who to give it to. And Johnston also pointed out that more than likely someone close to Donald Trump, or maybe Donald Trump himself, probably provided these forms to him. So Johnson wrote a piece on dcreport.org about the tax return. So I'm going to cover some of the key points here. First of all, Trump made $152.7 million of taxable income and paid a total of $36.6 million in federal income tax. So that's about a rate of 24%. And that's the same tax bracket as joint filers who earn $400,000 per year together. Now, Trump and Melania made $418,460 per day in 2005. So his income in 2005 was like a member of the 0.001% of earners, but the tax rate that he paid was a rate of what 99% of earners pay.
So essentially he's duping the system as it is already with the fact that he's paying far less than he actually should be for what he's getting on his taxes.
But what you'd ideally want him to pay for someone who makes that much money.
Right, exactly.
Second, as I pointed out before, this doesn't show the sources of his income. It doesn't differentiate business or personal expenses either. But here's something it does show. The 1995 tax returns that were leaked a few months ago showed that Trump got out of repaying the $918 million loan he borrowed for his failed casino business. Now, when a loan is not repaid, Congress says that money is income and taxes and they're owed immediately. What Trump did was he made use of an abusive tax shelter that Congress at the time had not closed to newcomers. So this tax shelter converted what should have been a tax bill of about $360 million of future, or I'm sorry, it took what was approximately $360 million that should have been paid on it and changed it into future tax breaks. So if we fast forward 10 years now, we're in 2005. Trump is still saving tax dollars from that tax shelter 10 years later.
Right. So in 2015, from 2005, he's saving money, which is, I mean, if we remember back to when he was in the presidential race doing, I think it was one of the debates with Hillary Clinton, whether it was first or second, I can't remember exactly. But it was one of those debates where the fact that he was dodging taxes was brought into light with one of his comments about being smart for not having to pay taxes.
That sounds like the second debate for some reason.
Yeah,
for some reason
I'm
I could see
thinking-
him just walking around, like he does.
Yeah. Well, no. Was the second debate the town hall? The one where he was
Yes.
just kind of like lording like a fucking hawk behind Hillary?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if it was the second one. I think it was one of the first because I remember him being at a podium when he said that, but my memory could be wrong.
I
Either
don't know.
way,
It's irrelevant.
right.
Where was I? So now here's where he bends the rules. This also shows some motivation to the proposed tax reform that he has. So in the United States, there's actually a dual tax system. So what we have is what you'd call regular tax or regular income tax and the alternative minimum tax or AMT. So under the regular income tax, Trump only paid $5.3 million. Now, what he did was he used $103 million, which David K. Johnson speculates was the money that was left in that tax shelter. And he wrote that $103 million as negative income. So instead of being $152.7 million, $103 million was subtracted from that. So now it's shrunk down to an adjusted gross income of $48.6 million. The rest of that money comes from, he claims, self-employment tax of $944,000. So that was also taken off. So we've gone from $152.7 million down to $48.6 million. Now, he also had $17 million of itemized deductions. Now, those deductions are not specified on a 1040 form, so we don't know what the itemized list looks like or what it includes. But what those deductions did was brought down his taxable income to $31.6 million. So Donald Trump earned $152.5 million, and he paid an income tax rate of 3.48%. To put that in perspective, in 2005, half of taxpayers whose income was less than $33,485 per year paid 3.51% in federal income tax. Now,
That's a bit ridiculous to me.
just a little bit.
Just a bit.
Now, the alternative minimum tax is where that remaining $31.3 million come from. Trump wants to eliminate the AMT in his tax reform. Couldn't figure out a reason why there, no.
No, not at all. there's no prior reasoning for why he would want to get rid of that in his tax reform.
No, not at all.
Sarcasm.
Just bringing down his seemingly 24% taxed income down to 3.48%. No big deal.
That's apparently not enough. He wants to
No,
have more to spend.
the world is not enough. So to summarize this, the 1040 is just a summary of a lot of other tax forms. And this release just shows the individual return, and it raises more questions. Where are the forms that the 1040 references? Like, what's the source of the $17 million of itemized deductions? We don't know how many years he was claiming negative income from this tax shelter between 1995, 2005, maybe beyond 2005, we don't know. It also shows us kind of a glimpse of how Trump and other super rich people know how to game the tax system that we have. And he has a personal motivation right there on those 2 pages for some of the proposed tax reforms that he has. So really, at the end, our tax system sucks at what it does.
Yeah, it's never going to be perfect, and certainly there could be reforms, as I think every single president who has run for office and held office has tried to push through in some form or another, whether that be a Democrat or a Republican. But it just irks me that they have this tax form information, a 1040 form, which is fine. It's not, his W-2s or something that's more recognizable to the lay person when it comes to talking about tax forms and anything like that. Everybody files their taxes, but I don't think anybody except for maybe an accountant can profess to actually knowing what each one means. And what annoys me the most is the fact that the White House and Donald Trump himself have yet to release full tax information for themselves, even though they now have had this come out to be public. He's still hiding behind that thin veil of, well, this is for the reasoning for this not being put out into the general public is because of the ongoing audits that I have with the IRS, which is, to me, complete and utter bullshit.
Well, it's bogus. The IRS has said it's bogus. That an audit's not preventing him from releasing his tax returns. He's just not releasing them. And he said that he's not going to either.
Right. Which, it's not illegal for him to do that, but it's extremely dishonest, and no other president has not released their tax forms when running for office, and least of all when they've been in office, especially for going on now 3 months of having been in office. But I suppose there isn't really too much that we can do about that other than keep hounding and, see what ends up coming of that. But I suppose that's enough about taxes. Moving on to something a little lighter, maybe.
Because taxes are awful. Nobody likes
taxes are awful. It's tax season. I don't want to do my taxes. I have to. I haven't gone about it yet. Engineers.
Put some money in a tax
like
haven.
To procrastinate.
Yeah.
In any event, moving on to something that's a little more scientifically minded, but still dealing with politics. There was a study that was completed by University of Massachusetts researchers that sought to define the way in which politically motivated reasoning affects support for policies or ideologies. Essentially what that means is that in this study, Democrats and Republicans were more likely to support a policy or idea when it was supported by their party. So the Republicans would, of course, align more with a policy that Republicans are backing, Democrats likewise. And what was interesting about this is a lot of people would assume that scientifically literate individuals, scientists, researchers, engineers even, would be inclined to maybe be a little less polarized on their views, but the opposite was true. If there was a staunchly Democratic individual or Republican right-leaning individual who was a scientist and literate in that, they would tend to align with the views of their chosen political party, regardless of the fact that there might be evidence presented to them opposite that. So that goes against conventional logic, but, you know, the thing that matters more from what this study found is that an individual is scientifically curious as opposed to being scientifically literate. That you're not maybe good at science or able to understand every single minutia of the topic that you're reading about when you're scientifically curious, but what matters more is that you are willing to be intrigued or read about new scientific discoveries or new things that come to light, as said by the dude in The Big Lebowski. New shit has come to light. Things like the Trappist system for those planets that were discovered, last month, a couple months ago.
Yeah, in February.
Yeah. So that sort of stuff actually has more of an effect than being able to do differential equations or, quantum mechanical calculations for fancy physics problems. So the takeaway from this isn't that we need to necessarily have a populace who is scientifically educated in the sense of having them be competent enough to become scientists and researchers, but having access to documents and the scientific discoveries that happen and are passed down from scientists, and having the public or the general populace be interested in those things and actively participating in reading those documents is more important for a more moderate and bipartisan focus in politics. It's not as divided as we've seen in this last election cycle and previously between Democrats and Republicans, and even infighting within the parties. If somebody leans way left and has an idea that's in the way left, someone might be inclined to agree with that if they're also in the far left and not as scientifically curious as they could be. It's an interesting take on what people would probably be inclined to normally think about scientists and that sort of mindset,
I'll probably kind of explain why you don't see a whole lot of people picking up arms in the name of science, Don't see anyone getting together, taking over federal land in the name of, thermodynamics or anything.
No, the laws of thermodynamics don't factor into people's decisions to push themselves toward defending someone taking over their land or trying to install a water pipeline in
right.
Sacred ceremonial grounds for a Native American tribe.
Right. I think we're just naturally, scientists have a natural disposition to want to learn more, no matter what kind of environment they're in.
Right. But with that study, it is a little concerning to see that people who are scientists do align more with their party that they have an affiliation for. So like a liberal scientist who's all about climate change is going to align with those climate change facts, whereas a Republican scientist might not lean with that because of that party affiliation. So I think scientists do have that disposition of understanding that facts outweigh political opinion, but when it comes to maybe an initial reaction that isn't necessarily as founded on it, they aren't maybe as skeptical as they would be otherwise when it comes to, say, something that's in their field. Like if a physicist had a report come out that was about something that was relevant to their field of study, they may not be as inclined to voice their dissent about that if it were from a colleague of theirs who happened to align with their political opinion. And obviously science doesn't necessarily have a political bias. It's not politically oriented at all. I think the politicization of climate change is one of really the only major scientific studies that's agreed upon by a vast majority that's been so politicized. And that has reasons behind it that we don't need to get into right now.
You know, it's not politicized.
What?
Time crystals.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that.
Now, I'm trying to wrap my head around this, and maybe you can simplify it for a simpler engineer like me. Now, when I heard time crystals, I'm thinking like, Napoleon Dynamite, when he's got the time machine. They put like the crystals in there. All it does is just shock him and his where. So that's definitely not the time crystals that these are. What are these things?
Okay, so time crystals are inherently weird. I will agree. It's based around quantum mechanics, so it's not exactly easy to understand, and it took me a while to get a general idea of what's going on here. But the basic premise of time crystals is that they're a new state of matter that is defined by a crystal structure that is not contained to just 3 dimensions. It's reaching into the 4th dimension of time. So what that means, I'll give an example, is say you have a time crystal. We're not thinking of it in terms of a 3D crystal necessarily, but it's a crystal. And you have a driver period T, or a period that is like a magnetic field or a laser that has an oscillation to it. So this driver period affects a time crystal, and if it were a regular crystal, you would assume that that driver period wouldn't have any effect on the inherent oscillation of the atoms within that crystalline structure, right?
Correct.
So with that, time crystal would actually synchronize with that driver period such that you would observe the system that crystal is in oscillating with a period greater than your initial driver period. So that means that energy's been added back into the system by the time crystal itself, which is kind of funky. So,
interesting.
Wrapping your head around that, what that means is that time crystals can't remain in equilibrium within their environment. They're always moving, and that's because their pattern doesn't repeat in space like it does in a 3-dimensional crystal solid, but it is within time. So that allows for perpetual motion within the crystal structure to a certain extent. There are obviously factors that limit that, which are not within my realm of knowledge at this time, because trying to read through this paper on this thing is not an easy task, especially when I can't attest to having the most foremost physics knowledge in my head. But basically where this paper comes from is a group of researchers from UC Berkeley, UT Austin, Texas, Harvard, and Maryland. The group from Berkeley, Austin, and Harvard put out a paper that essentially defined a phase diagram for this time crystal structure. Now, phase diagrams, for the lay person or someone who isn't familiar with them, essentially are a means of defining the different states of matter, whether that be solid, liquid, or gaseous, within a certain material. Normally, you see phase diagrams for metallic materials, metals like steel or iron, and they have different phases that are denoted by lines, and depending on your temperature or pressure or time period within this phase diagram, you will reach different states of matter within that material, and sometimes within steel being the most classic case, you'll reach different types of steel, whether that be austenitic, martensitic, bayonitic. There are a number of different steel types. That's all material science related, and we don't need to really get into that because time crystals are on a completely different spectrum. So, with that, this paper defined this crystal structure in a phase diagram and also gave some guidelines for figuring out how to actually produce time crystals physically. So Maryland went about doing this by lining up 10 terbium ions, which is one of those materials that's way out in the periodic table that you don't see that often. I honestly don't know what's the number of that. Do you know the number of ytterbium?
It's in the hundreds, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it's up there. And so it's way out in left field. But they took these ions and lined them up and did some trickery with lasers and magnets and essentially caused those ions to oscillate at a certain frequency for far longer than they should have, and without the continued influence of these lasers and magnets. They just kind of left them there in this environment, and they oscillated on their own. The Harvard team
is, real quick, ytterbium is atomic number 70.
70, okay. Close. Yes. Is that a transition metal?
Gosh. I think it's just a normal metal.
I should know this. How long has it been since I looked at a periodic table? It's been a while.
I don't know. Actually, I think it's a rare metal.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's one of those weird ones that's in like the lanthanides or actinides.
Right.
Yeah, it's a lanthanide. Okay, that makes sense. Anyway, beside the point. But that was one method of making these. The Harvard research team, used densely packed nitrogen vacancy centers in black diamonds, which were made to resonate using magnetic fields.
See, that sounds so much cooler.
It does. I mean, diamonds are involved. And
like ytterbium? We didn't even know what that was. Diamonds were like, oh, I know what that is.
I mean, it sounds more exotic up front, but, lasers and magnets are relatively commonplace. Granted, the methods they're using are completely crazy, but...
just a little bit.
Yeah. So, the fact that they were able to do this two different ways, vastly different ways, shows that there is a practical usage of the definition that was provided in this initial research paper, and that more teams can take that base and go on to produce multiple different varieties of time crystals that can then be used for research purposes. So, enough of the explanation about how they actually work. Let's get into what the practical application of these is, because I would assume you're probably confused to all hell about what we would even use these things for.
Let's get this out of the way first. Time travel is not anything that can be used for.
No. Time travel is not happening anytime soon, if ever, folks.
Sorry, Napoleon Dynamite. Sorry, Kip.
No. Sadly, we're not there yet. In any event, the practical application about this weird state of matter is within quantum computing and quantum thermodynamics, things that involve quantum mechanics. With quantum computing, what the application of these crystals could be is that due to their instability, they could be used to stabilize quantum states against decoherence effects. So decoherence effects essentially are what limit the lifespan of a qubit, which is equivalent to a standard bit in a computer. It's just in a quantum computing state. It would limit that qubit's lifespan, which is important because we think of computers with bits having pretty much an infinite lifespan when compared to quantum computers. But with quantum states, they're so finicky because of the principles of quantum mechanics that having an extension of that lifespan would be great for just studying them and getting a better idea of how to push those forward further into the future. And also with thermodynamics, quantum thermodynamics is something that's come up somewhat in recent years, but it's been studied in theory, not really been able to be tested so much. This would also serve as a means to prolong the life of quantum thermodynamic systems so that study could be done on those and more information could be collected on them, better research could be done. So there are practical applications to it, even though it might kind of seem real weird.
Just a little bit. Geez. So, matter that exists in the fourth dimension.
Yes.
Finally.
I know.
I don't know about you, but I've been waiting for that.
I mean, when are we going to get to matter in the fifth dimension?
I don't know. What is the fifth dimension?
I don't know. But string theory says there's something like 11 dimensions.
Oh, jeez.
We're not getting into that now. Don't worry about that.
No, drop that right now.
No.
All right. Last month.
Yes.
Around Trappist-I, which is a star.
Yes.
39.5 light years away, or 12.1 parsecs for you Han Solo types.
Correct.
And
now,
the
before
constellation.
yes. we go on, I want to define this a little better because there were people during this NASA live announcement of this that did not seem to understand what exactly a light year means.
Oh, yes.
So, a light
that
year...
was disturbing.
A light year is a measure of distance. It's not a measure of time. It's a measure of time in the sense that it's a measure of distance of how long it takes for light to travel 1 year. Now, that means that this system is 40 light years away, essentially, for all intents and purposes, 39 and a half, or 235 trillion miles. Okay? Now, I did a few calculations, being the engineer and interest in science that I have, to figure out how long it would take us to reach there, to put it in perspective for people. So, the fastest moving object, man-made object, that we've ever launched from the Earth is the New Horizons spacecraft that was launched and reached Pluto 2 years ago. That left Earth at 36,373 miles per hour. Now, moving at that speed, which is the fastest that we've ever launched something, let alone humans, in a spacecraft, that would take approximately 12.7 billion hours or 1.5 million years to reach Trappist-I, the system. So maybe that gives a little bit of an idea for what exactly 40 light years of distance really means. Aside over, you can move on.
There's I think there's fossils that are not even that old.
Yeah, it's a long time.
You and me would be fossilized if someone left right now to go to Trappist-I.
We wouldn't be fossilized. We would be dust by the time that we got there.
No, I mean, if someone else left by the time they got there, us on Earth. Never mind.
Yeah, well, fair enough. We'd have to get some cryostasis figured out before we did that, but
yeah.
whatever. Moving on.
So, Trappist-I, 39.5 light years away, is in the constellation Aquarius. Trappist-I is an ultra cool dwarf star. What I always find funny about how they define um, stars by temperature is that ultra cool is still pretty damn hot. I think it's about 2,700 Kelvin,
Yeah,
which is uh, you don't want to be inside something like that.
you don't want to be
Um,
anywhere near that,
no,
really,
and
unless
yet,
you're, of course, the distance away that some of these planets are.
and yet, seven of these planets, all seven of them that they found actually, are all terrestrial planets. What that means is that they have a surface defined by something solid like rock or ice. That's a simple way of defining what we mean by that.
They're
These
similar
planets
to
were just
Earth, basically.
right. These planets were easily named B, C, D, E, F, G, H. Um, in previous month in February, NASA's announcement said that three of these planets, E, F, and G, were in TRAPPIST-1's habitable zone. Um, habitable zone basically meaning it's the distance away that Earth is kind of away from the sun, but it's proportional based on how big the star and what kind of star it is. Um, the estimated time that we could get there is not soon enough. Obviously, 1.5 million years is a long time to have to go somewhere. Um, Now, reading this kind of made me curious about planet habitability and how we define that. Um, I could talk a whole show about how to, you know, how do we space colonize and human space exploration, what makes a planet habitable. So, keeping this short though,
We don't need
because
to
we're
go into
busy.
any sort of crazy scientific or science fiction topics where we're talking about things like geoforming and all of that
No,
ridiculous.
N- no. There's a laundry list out there of different topics. Anyway,
Exactly.
um, somewhat relevant. In eighth grade, we had this. It's kind of a goofy project. We were given a planet in the solar system, and we had to make like a physical model of an animal that we just made up that would live on this planet. My group got assigned Neptune, which is awful. I don't think anything could live on that planet anyway.
Good
I mean,
old frozen
if you
gas
have
giant there.
right, if you have frozen methane and ammonia, I mean, that doesn't sound like an ideal environment for most things.
Not really.
So we made this just abomination of this crustacean looking thing. It was like a scorpion with a bigger tail that would propel it through the water, and it had to eat ice and rocks because that's all Neptune has to offer things to eat.
Fantastic diet.
Yeah. I wanted to take the cheap way out and just make like a little unicellular form, but that wouldn't work.
Nah, nobody wants to be that
Um,
group.
no, unfortunately. Uh, the point of this project, though, was obviously, even though it's fake, you just had to roll with it, is that life is plastic to its environment. You know, the giraffe that can't reach the leaves, doesn't have a neck tall enough, dies off. The little crustacean creature that can't eat rocks doesn't live on Neptune. Um, anyway, so any life that's out there in the universe, maybe on another planet, would hypothetically have adapted to the environment that it lives in. So maybe a human being wouldn't survive in that environment, but there's other life that could. For example, you can't just drop a human on Venus or Mars. That doesn't mean something may live there now, may have lived there previously. So the way we think about planet habitability is how close to Earth are the traits of that planet? Since Earth is the only conditions that we know of observable life, we haven't observed life anywhere else outside of Earth. That habitability does not necessarily mean that life as we know it on Earth is present on a planet. It may have conditions for life to live there that maybe isn't there now, or will get there later. Who knows? But habitability is an indication that conditions on and around the planet could hypothetically support life. There are a couple factors that have to be present there. Planet has to be terrestrial. There's a lot of stuff that have to be going on inside and outside the planet. What's the planet's mass? What's its radius? Geological activity, environment, orbital rotational behavior. What
Atmosphere.
kind of star? Yeah, what kind of star does it orbit? Could it sustain water? What's on there that is a mean for an organism to create energy to live on? I mean, and on and on and on. But fascinating topic to think about.
Right. And really, what comes into this more, other than thinking about habitability and what could possibly be on planets like that, the fact that these planets are so close in orbit, I think it was defined during the press conference that if you were standing on one of these planets' surfaces, the other two planets and even the other planets in the system would appear to be the size of the moon on Earth or even larger. So, feasibly, if there were, say, intelligent life on these planets, they could even be planet hopping between these things because they're so close, similarly to how we put men on the moon back in the 60s, so long as you're not a conspiracy theorist about that. But going toward what we can do now and what we can use these planets for, this discovery, there are telescopes, obviously, that exist on Earth that were used to find them. And funny enough, I know we were talking about the weird kind of name when this first came up, the Trappist system. Everyone was kind of like, well, why is it called the Trappist system? That's just odd. But the reason for that is actually due to a telescope on Earth called the Transiting Planets and Planetesimals Small Telescope, which, if you look at, gets shortened to TRAPPIST. So that was one of the telescopes that was used in the array to detect these planets around this star, hence the name. So it's not just kind of up in the air or related to Trappist beer, which is delicious but doesn't really have much of a place in naming a planetary system.
I mean, we've never gotten to that point where we've named a planetary system after a beer. I think we've had the opposite happen.
Yeah.
Maybe someone can confirm that.
Someday we'll run out of things to name it after, and it'll come down to naming something the Guinness system, or hopefully not Bud or Coors Light, because Christ, I would feel so bad for that planetary system. No one deserves that fate.
Watch it be the first planetary system with intelligent life. It'll come over here and kick our ass for calling it such a silly name.
Oh, God, please no. But as more of an idea of what we can do with this system right now, obviously we're not going to be sending humans there or even robotic drones or spacecraft there. But there are telescopes on Earth and in space, like the James Webb Telescope, which is supposed to launch in 2018, so next year, and be operational later that year into 2019 and 2020, that will be able to better image these planetary systems. And there are telescopes on the ground that have equipment, obviously, that detected these, but there's more advanced equipment that's going to come out that will be able to better detect these stars and their orbiting planets. Penn State actually is building right now a system called NEAD, which I believe is it stands for, or it's named after, a Native American something or other. It's based around that, but the acronym stands for something completely different as per normal. But essentially it's a spectrograph that's used to find planets around stars based on a wobble associated that those planets effect on their home star. And it's ridiculous when you think about it that they're looking for these minute fluctuations in these stars' brightnesses. Brightnesses? Wow. The star's brightness that is associated with a planet causing a wobble of that star. And they're going to be outfitted on telescopes in Chile and I believe one in Texas that will be used to do further studies on these planets and maybe tell us a little bit more about their actual composition and things of that nature. So going forward, there's still a lot that we can learn about this stuff and kind of go from there with it. We aren't going to be sending anybody there, but we sure as heck can learn something about it and maybe even apply it to our own home planet and planets in our solar system for learning more about planetary science.
Goodness knows we need it.
Yeah, right?
All right, you knew it was coming.
Yep.
Got to talk a little bit about Trumpcare.
Hit me with it.
Not a whole lot though. We're a little late to the party on this, so I don't have a whole lot more to add. This is just gonna more, I don't know how to say it, kind of give a small update about things that have happened in the past day or so. John Oliver, Ezra Klein, Robert Reich, many other people have covered this better than I can, so there's not a whole much more to say about it. The way I'm just gonna summarize this, the American Health Care Act, or AHCA, or Trumpcare, or Republicare.
Ryan Care, if we want to single out the man with the plan in his hand.
Yeah, Ryan Care. It's a transfer of wealth disguised as a healthcare plan when you get down to what's in it. And Paul Ryan and the Republicans know exactly what this bill would do. I mean, if they didn't, they wouldn't have, presented it to the public as it is. And, I'm not sure that they honestly have the gall to go through with it after the Congressional Budget Office's scathing report about it. So Tucker Carlson interviewed Donald Trump on Fox News yesterday. And he pointed out that the AHCA has, a massive tax cut for the rich, and that counties that voted for Trump would do worse under Trumpcare or Ryan Care or Republicare, whatever you want to call it, than counties that voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, Trump responded to this, and are you seated? Because you're going to want to be seated for this. His response was, "Oh, I know. Oh, yeah, I know. I know it's going to harm all these people who gave me their vote." Then he goes on to say that the AHCA is very preliminary. Carlson would point out that it's inconsistent with what Trump's presidential campaign message was, that everyone's going to be covered and everyone's going to have lower deductibles and be more affordable. Trump's response to Carlson calling him out like that was, a lot of things aren't consistent, but these are going to be negotiated. We've got to go to the Senate. We'll see what happens in the Senate. So basically, hey, Senate, here's this, really cruddy bill that I'm behind. Fix it.
This pile of shit.
Yeah. I mean, this healthcare plan is the exact opposite of his campaign message. If you want to call this preliminary, you're not even close to what you promised. But I mean, really, do we think he's going to keep his promise? Not really. I'm not surprised.
No.
I'm not surprised, but apparently his voters are surprised. I don't know if you watched this. I think it was this past Sunday or maybe a week ago from last Sunday.
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders and Chris Hayes from there's a show on MSNBC called All In, did a town hall in McDowell County, West Virginia.
Right.
McDowell County has about 21,000 or so people in it. It's one of the poorest counties in the United States. In 2016, Donald Trump won 74% of the vote in McDowell County. So 4,614 out of the 6,043 total votes were given to Donald Trump. This town hall only had 350 people in it, so it's only 1.67% of the county population, or 5.83% of the total votes if you assume that all 350 of them voted. So some of them had, said they voted for Trump. you know, odds are they're probably going to be in that audience anyway. And quite honestly, you know, I don't feel too sorry for these people, but at the same time, these are people, you know. They deserve to have a decent living just as much as anybody else. And these are people who want to work, or who do work and still live in poverty. McDowell County ranks 3,142nd out of 3,142 counties in the U.S. in life expectancy and drug-induced deaths in 2015.
That's
So it's
sad,
in
but
last.
also
It is
impressive.
sad. Impressive. I don't know if that's a good word for that.
No, it's
So,
not, but it's what came to mind.
so Chris Hayes asked the audience to raise their hand if they had been directly affected by the opioid crisis. The number of hands of people that went up in that room was kind of shocking. Like, there's such a small percent of the county population at this town hall, and there was probably well over more than half of that crowd that had their hand raised. I mean, think about how many other McDowell counties are there in the United States, you know, that have such poverty, such a opioid crisis, have a low life expectancy, you know? The AHCA is going to roll back the Medicaid expansion that the ACA provided. So 14 million Medicaid recipients right now would be without health insurance by 2026 because of those cuts, according to the Congressional Budget Office. So there's no substitute for those people. They have nowhere to go if this is taken away from them. I mean, a majority of Medicaid recipients work full-time or part-time. You know, there's this stigma that they're all lazy, that they don't want to work. And giving them a tax credit and a health savings account, it might as well not even be there. I mean, these people make such little money, then how are they going to put it aside? What tax credit are you going to give on little income that's going to cover health expenses? I mean, Republicans aren't doing anything for these people in any way, shape, or form. If you're too young, if you're young and healthy or super rich, Trumpcare is fine for you. But what about the rest of America? Yeah, something to chew on.
Yeah, there's not really a lot of good that's in that bill when compared with the American or the Affordable Care Act. Excuse me, got the two confused there for a second. But I'm not saying like the Affordable Care Act was perfect by any means, but it did solve a decent amount of a problem with giving however many people health care. What it was like, the amount of people losing health care from this American Health Care Act would be something like 24 million about.
It would add 24 million to the uninsured.
Yeah. And I mean, I wanted to see what exactly the major differences were between the two bills, and you can find that information pretty readily online. But with like Medicaid, reducing the coverage of that and kind of pushing the responsibility for how Medicaid insurance is handled was going to be pushed back onto state governments a little bit more than federal governments, which, if you look at that, with state governments and their budgets being as constrained as they are, I can't imagine that they're going to dedicate as much as would be needed to Medicaid that the federal government could help with. And other areas, of course, being, you know, tax credits and reduced subsidies for everybody else, especially when it comes down to the whole age gap. Not really the right term. What am I thinking of? Age discrimination, more or less, that this bill kind of would put into effect, where the older you are, the more you could be charged for insurance. It's not good, and I don't think anyone agrees 100% with it, or, you know, like 90%, even Republicans don't agree with it. So the fact that it's gotten through one committee on its way to being enacted is a little bit disheartening, but I hope that there are some individuals, Republicans and Democrats and senators and congressmen and women who kind of come to their senses and are able to push back on it and reveal it for what it is, which is exactly as you've described it, a means for rich people and individuals who aren't necessarily in need of the best health care to have a major advantage over those who may not be able to pay for the best health care, but still should have that health care.
What I find interesting is that, the cost of premiums for the elderly could go up 5 times as much. Not cost, excuse me. Premiums for the elderly can go up almost 5 times as much as they are now. And so they're going to get a tax credit that would only be 2 times as much as a younger, healthier person would get. And yet their cost is so much higher. So they're getting rid of the individual mandate, which even with that mandate, there's still uninsured people who've chosen to just pay the penalty. The point of the mandate was to have more people buying insurance in the individual market to bring down premium costs. You have more people buying insurance, you're not going to have to charge premiums that are higher. It's more high-risk patients, the elderly, people who are terminally ill, things like that.
Yeah, and getting rid of that enables the higher premiums to come back for elderly and individuals in general. It brings it back to insurance companies being able to charge more of what they want. It's privatization in mass privatization of healthcare, which is what Republicans seem to be about. Certainly less government interaction with things, but at the same time, it's not a good enough solution for what we have in our environment in the United States regarding healthcare.
Right. I think the one reason that they really hated the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security is that it goes against Republican principles in that it's a government program that works for people.
Yeah.
It's not a private program that's working for people. It's actually the government doing its function and working for the people. And that drives them nuts. So instead of making something better, which the Affordable Care Act's been pretty good for me at least.
Right. Well, you have medication that helps treat a condition that you have that you wouldn't be able to afford otherwise if you didn't have that coverage for that cost of that.
Correct. But boy, there's another thing you could run a whole show about. But you know what? You know what I hate?
What?
Immigration bans.
Yes. Not immigrants, because
no.
You yourself, well, your father was an immigrant.
Yes.
As were my grandparents, as were, the majority of the United States citizens who are currently living in this country at one point or another came over from Europe or South America or somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. So Trump attempted another Muslim ban. It's not an immigration ban, it's a Muslim ban.
It is.
Hours before Trump's second attempt at a Muslim ban would have gone into effect, Judge Derek Watson blocked the ban. He's a judge in Hawaii.
Praise Derek Watson.
Yes. Now today, a second federal judge in Maryland blocked part of the Muslim ban 2.0. Both these judges quoted Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Stephen Miller in their decisions. I'm not kidding you, just flat out quoted what they said. Someone needs to tell these three guys that the Fifth Amendment is your friend when you're trying to execute a bigoted Muslim ban.
You would think they would know that, considering they're
right.
involved in politics, but beside the point.
I guess not. So the quotes used were in March of 2016, Trump was campaigning in the primaries. He was on Fox News, and he said, quote, "We're having problems with Muslims, and we're having problems with Muslims coming into the country." Now, that same month, he also told CNN, "Islam hates us." Rudy Giuliani said in a TV interview, When Trump first announced it, he said Muslim ban. He called me up, he said, put a commission together, show me the right way to do it legally. Last month, Stephen Miller is on Fox News. He said that, quote, fundamentally, you're still going to have the same basic policy outcome. So he's basically saying that the new Muslim ban is Muslim ban classic. So, I mean, there were other quotes that they referenced, but essentially, they screwed
name.
themselves. Yeah.
God.
So, Judge Theodore D., I'm going to mess up his last name. I think it's Chuang.
Shuang?
Is it Chuang?
I'm no authority, but that's how I read it.
Chuang.
Bird.
He was the federal judge in Maryland that blocked the Muslim ban today.
Right.
I'll read you the statement from his decision. Quote, direct statements of President Trump's animus towards Muslims and intention to impose a ban of Muslims from entering the United States present a convincing case that the first executive order was issued to accomplish as nearly as possible President Trump's promised Muslim ban. In particular, the direct statements by President Trump and Mayor Giuliani's account of his conversation with President Trump revealed that the plan had been to bar the entry of nationals of predominantly Muslim countries deemed to constitute dangerous territory in order to approximate a Muslim ban without calling it one, precisely the form of the travel ban in the first executive order. So Judge Schwing's conclusion also read that the court will issue an injunction barring enforcement of Section 2C of the executive order. Section 2C suspends the unrestricted entry of nationals of Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, and Yemen for 90 days. So this ruling basically blocks the part of the Muslim ban that would halt issuances of visas for people from those 6 countries.
Okay.
So Schwang also stated in his decision that in this highly unique case, the record provides strong indications that the national security purpose is not the primary purpose for the travel ban, which is like, duh.
Right.
It's pretty obvious from these quotes. So, of course, Trump comes out today. He calls Derek Watson's ruling and, this judge's ruling judicial overreach. He'll appeal it as far as it needs to go, all the way to the Supreme Court if he has to. It's like he doesn't learn. He didn't learn the first time that, he and his cohorts essentially do the work for the judges by saying these inane things, years ago and even last month. It's like all the argument that they need for this Muslim ban, Volume 2, was a montage of Trump and his surrogates talking. So all in all, this ban and the one before it are just acts of bigotry. They're not founded in facts. You can see right through Steve Bannon's fingerprints all over this thing.
Yeah, it's no better than the first. I mean, the only thing that it really fixed was the problems with existing green card holders and citizens who were traveling to foreign countries like these Muslim countries, predominantly Muslim, that were returning from them or were on their way over who had visas to enter the United States. With that first one, I remember everybody just going nuts over the fact that there were people who were stopped in airports who were in the air when that executive order was signed and couldn't get into the country or were not allowed entry into the country. It was a mess, to say the least, and this isn't much better.
Nope. And you're not going to have something better. There's no reason for this. It's just bigotry, really.
No. And I can understand why some people might have reservations about illegal immigrants or quote unquote terrorists from these countries coming into our nation. I mean, if you look at Trump's idea of building a wall on the Mexican border, it harkens back to this sort of same ideal where we're trying to keep people out of the country, arguably one of the most inclusive countries in the world, at least insofar as the Statue of Liberty's inscription would dictate. But aside from that, I don't agree with it. I don't think other people should allow it to happen, and it seems that these two courts in Maryland and Hawaii are taking that to heart, and there are going to be other courts that take it to heart and try to fight for their right to party, as the Beastie Boys would say, but more so fight for the right of the Constitution.
All right, we're getting to the end here. So
Slowly.
I'll try to power through these two. What I found interesting stories, I don't know if other people will find them as interesting as I did. Paleomicrobiologist from Australia's University of Adelaide.
Paleo what?
Paleomicrobiologist.
That's a mouthful.
That's about 3 different disciplines combined.
Yes, it is.
So this paleomicrobiologist examined the plaque from the remains of 2 different Neanderthals. The plaque in between the teeth of their remains. Neanderthals didn't brush their teeth. One lived 48,000 years ago in Spain, who I will call Axel. So at the time, Spain was a forested area. There weren't really many animals for Neanderthals to eat. So this forced Axel to be a vegetarian. His plaque contained wild mushrooms, pine nuts, moss, and tree bark. That sounds appetizing, right?
Delicious.
Yeah.
Big for a great soup, maybe.
Even then, I'm not sure. You'd have to cook that for a couple hours.
Right.
So additionally, Axel had an abscess in his jaw and an intestinal parasite that caused severe diarrhea. I don't know how you confirm a parasite from a 48,000-year-old Neanderthal remains. But
I can tell you how. Very carefully.
Oh boy.
Moving on.
To aid his pain, Axel consumed poplar bark, which contains acetylsalicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin, and a natural antibacterial mold, I don't know about you, but that sounds yummy. Axel has a diet I completely envy. The second Neanderthal lived in Belgium 36,000 years ago, who I'll call Carmen, just to, balance out the genders here.
Fair enough.
The article didn't specify if the remains was male or female, but whatever.
We're not assuming a gender, but we're assuming a gender for the sake of difference.
I wanted to name it, and you came up with Carmen anyways. So I'm just gonna blame you. I'll take that. Okay. 36,000 years ago, Belgium was grassy and hilly, so there's a lot of open space. So there were much larger animals that lived there at the time. So Carmen's diet consisted of woolly rhinoceros, wild sheep, and wild mushrooms, which sounds a lot more luscious than what Axel had to consume. Lucky for Carmen, her remains, or his remains, who knows, did not indicate any health ailments, so there were no traces of any sort of medication in Carmen's plaque. The take-home point from this is that if you're ever in pain or have diarrhea and you don't have anything nearby, look for the nearest poplar tree and eat its bark, because if it's good enough for Neanderthals, why not you?
Agreed. And I'll add to this, I did a little background research on whether or not you could even eat tree bark, because to me that doesn't exactly sound appetizing. But apparently, Indians in the past, Native Americans in the past, went about eating tree bark, white pine tree bark specifically. And there's actually a whole article that you can find online about outdoorsmen and how to cook and prepare tree bark.
Interesting.
Yes. It is.
Don't know if I'd care to ever do that, but it's definitely interesting.
Apparently, tree bark, when cooked correctly, will end up having a consistency not unlike potato chips. So maybe if you added a little salt and pepper, or maybe if you like sour cream and onion potato chips, you could get some of that flavoring and sprinkle them onto whatever tree bark you happen to find and go about eating those while you're out camping next time.
I'm not I'd have to be pretty desperate to try that out.
I'd agree, but hey, if you need
Eh,
some form of sustenance, look no further
why
than
not?
a freshly felled tree.
Why not?
Why not?
The other story I found, kind of exciting. I mean, it should be. A 1.6 billion year old fossil was found in India. Now, this fossil, while being just red algae, is not only just the oldest plant fossil on record, but the oldest known fossil of a multicellular organism, or something that's just not one celled organism, um, that we have on record now. It beats the previously held record of the oldest fossil found in the Canadian Arctic that was 1.2 billion years old. Um, red algae has a couple different types, but the one most people probably know is nori, or an ingredient in sushi. So if you ever go back 1.6 billion years, you may be able to make yourself a nice sushi roll. But you'll probably have to bring your own fish, rice, and, seaweed.
Right, and a knife to carve your fish and all of that good
Well,
stuff.
yeah, I mean, that's a given if you're going to go all the way out there.
Right.
Penultimately, are you, probably not, but are you following April the giraffe at all?
No, I'm not. This is that pregnant giraffe that's been everywhere on the internet recently,
Yes.
right?
I cannot escape it. I don't understand. Like it's just Facebook. Facebook will not let me get away from this. And I don't know when like the live feed started or, when all this hysteria began. For me, the first time I saw the live feed was about 4 weeks ago. Like I log into Facebook, first thing I see, one of the local news affiliates where I live is sharing the live feed. I'm like, okay. Then every day since then, about 4 or 5 times a day, that same news station shares the video again. And there it is. Every time my Facebook feed puts it right at the top. I've never opened this live feed. I've never reacted to it. Never commented on it. I just scroll right past it. And yet, there it is. I've seen it so much now that I'm actually starting to care when the baby's born.
That
Like,
might be why they're putting it on your feed so much.
did they
Is
want me to care about the unborn giraffe, I
they
guess? I
want you to
don't know.
care about this unborn, soon to be born giraffe. Maybe they're
Uh,
pushing conservation efforts for giraffes. Although,
I don't know. I don't know about that.
I mean, it doesn't hurt, but I would agree that Facebook and in general, internet news is a bit too pervasive when you're just wanting to get on the internet and watch cat videos on YouTube or something of that nature.
Or giraffe videos, apparently.
Or
You know
giraffe
the giraffe,
videos.
the giraffe, it has like a pen. I think it's called a birthing pen. I
Right.
know it just walks around all day, like it's not doing anything interesting.
No.
So I don't get the appeal to it. I know there's live feeds of like just kittens or puppies in a pen, and like people watch that, and even then I'm like, why? It's like,
I mean, they're domesticated at least. With a giraffe, shouldn't it be out foraging or like not
well,
stuck in a
it's
pen?
winter.
Well, I
It's in the
guess,
middle of
yeah.
winter in New York.
Okay.
So I don't.
That makes more
The
sense.
giraffe is in New York, yeah.
Right. I did not know that. Yeah,
They have a few
giraffes in
fetus.
New York, contrary to those films Madagascar, probably don't belong in the streets.
Yeah, and they probably don't like being in 3 feet of snow in sub-freezing temperature.
No, I would agree with that. So
Pretty much.
tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day, and though It may not be anywhere near when this gets released, but I'm not the biggest St. Patrick's Day reveler in the world, and I can't imagine you are either. But I thought
No.
it would be an interesting idea to maybe regale each other with tales of perhaps some other people that we've seen on St. Patrick's Day having a grand old time and more than likely being completely plastered drunk. Um,
Definitely accurate from
yeah,
my experiences.
I can start because I was in Chicago one year during a spring break in college. I was visiting my brother, and most people associate Chicago with intense St. Patrick's Day fanfare. They dye their river green. Everybody gets drunk starting at like 7 in the morning, and they go until they pass out or die. One of the two, hopefully not the latter, but I wouldn't put it past them. In any event, I was there. I was meandering around in the streets, and it was probably about 10 in the morning, I would say, on St. Patrick's Day. And I distinctly remember there being a screeching of tires and a bus stopping, a large bus. In Chicago, they have those double long buses, and there was a calamity going on around it. Well, it just so happened that some woman who was completely drunk was in front of this bus, stopping traffic, trying to hug this bus in not a completely platonic way. And things just kind of kept deteriorating. She tried to board the bus, couldn't really walk, fell off the bus, had to be helped by, I think, one of her friends. Not too sure. It may have just been someone else who was there and felt pity for her. But that was probably the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen, was a grown woman completely wasted at 10 in the morning on, I'm pretty sure, a weekday that was trying to hug a bus. So I don't know if you have anything comparable to that, but
Not really. they don't. Two things stand out to me. Like I've had pretty boring St. Patrick's Days for the most part in my life. Um, I'll tell my lamer story first. One year in middle school, I didn't wear green because I didn't have anything green. And what happens to you when you don't wear green?
you get pinched.
You get pinched. Oh, people were pinching me all day. Like people I didn't really know or didn't talk to, people in grades below me. I think some teachers also pinched me, but I don't remember because I was so traumatized, you know.
Absolutely
But
traumatized.
absolutely, so much pinching. But now I'm more vigilant. I've never not worn green on a St. Patrick's Day since then. That's my really cool St. Patrick's Day story. But
Fantastic. Riveting.
last year, I went out to a bar that I often went to. I don't go anymore because I moved away from there.
Fair enough.
Yeah. This place normally, like, I think last year St. Patrick's Day was on a Thursday. Thursdays aren't usually that packed until late at night because they used to do Thirsty Thursday, bring in a
Right.
DJ and all that
Yeah,
jazz.
general thing. Go get drunk on a Thursday or at least have a
Pretty,
few beverages.
pretty much. So I get there like shortly after work. It's about 4:30 to 5, and this place is already packed. But there's a seat for me at the bar right next to one of the other regulars. Um, so I sit with him, and still more people are coming in. Because I'm sitting there, there's like easily starting to be 3 rows of people around the bar, the people seated, and then 2 people standing behind you. So it's like, good luck getting up unless you gotta leave. Um, so I'm sitting there, and there's There's at least two girls. I don't know if there were more with them. It was too loud for me to figure it out. But I'm sitting there and I'm eating a Reuben sandwich, and I hear this chick behind me yelling, some order out. The bartender like leans over because she can't hear her because it's too damn loud in there. So this chick puts her foot on the back of the bar stool. You know where the footrest on the back.
Right.
She puts her foot on there, leans forward. Her boobs are like right on the small of my back and like pushing me forward while I'm trying to eat. And she's just yelling the order on top of me like she knows who the fuck I am. So I'm like, I like buck her off. I'm like, what are you doing? She's like, oh, sorry, I don't know you, which was another lie. Like she was just being rude, I think. Like she's trying to play it off like, oh, I thought you were some person I know. Like what? Okay, even if I was, that's how you say hello to them, is you lean on them, put your breast on them. That's kind of strange.
Seems like she
So
might have been a little thirsty, maybe.
no, I don't think so.
Well, maybe just for water then.
No, for green beer. I don't know. I know it was something green. It was green.
Well, St.
So
Patrick's Day, pretty much everything is green.
right. So the bartender is like, she's kind of laughing at me because she knows who I am. Like I've always come in there by myself or like with the family member with me. So they think it's freaking hilarious. I didn't see this chick for the rest of the night, but they still gave me crap about it throughout the year. That this chick just came up and just planted herself on my back trying to yell a drink order out. And they think it's hilarious. And if I ever go back to that bar, I'm 100% sure someone would bring it up again.
That will stay with you for as long as you live if you ever go back to
Forever.
that bar.
So, if any women ever have to order a drink and have to lean over somebody, I have experience in that area. I don't know how to sell that to people just to let them know if I put that on the back of a t-shirt or something.
Yeah, I would think the back of a t-shirt would probably be the best place for that.
I don't know.
Highly visible
Don't
for
know how to make people aware of, of that.
it'd be highly visible at least. I mean, if someone was going to lean on you and put their boobs on your back, you would at least have a message there that would indicate to them that yes, I have had experience with this before. No, I'm not okay with it. Fuck
Right.
off.
It's not like if it happened again, I'd be like, oh, what the shit? I'd be like, oh, wait, I'm wearing the t-shirt. Of course it's going to happen.
Yeah. People would be aware, so they
Right.
might take advantage of that fact. Either
Oh,
way,
man.
those are the types of things that happen on a holiday that is literally just about drinking. So you can't really expect too much more from that.
I saw this funny picture of these guys that had, they had the colors of the Irish flag, the green, white, and orange, but they painted it the vertical orientation, which is a different country's flag. I think it's India. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, something like that. One of the eastern more countries.
Right, 'cause Ireland's flag is horizontal.
Right.
So if you don't paint it horizontal, you don't have an Irish flag on you. You have a different country's flag. You're celebrating the wrong holiday.
It's sort of the similar thing with Germany and Belgium, where it's the same colors but in a different order.
Right.
Oh, well, in any event, we've run long enough, I'd say. Any closing statements on your end for this first illustrious high-quality podcast?
Well, first of all, these will be shorter. I'll assure you, about 20, 25 or 26 minutes shorter.
Well,
The only take-home points I really want to drive home, Republicans, and I mean the elected ones, not people. People are misguided. The
congressmen and women.
Republicans, yeah, the elected ones, the president, his cabinet, have no morals and no idea what actually makes this country great again. And what really makes this country great is the fact that we know that Neanderthals once ate poplar bark to treat diarrhea.
Fantastic words that would be worthy of any presidential inaugural address, I would say.
Oh, yes. Well, do you have any closing statements?
Myself, other than just be safe on St. Patrick's Day, don't be a dumbass, and don't try and hug a bus, because you'll look bad, and you could possibly end up getting yourself or others injured.
Most likely yourself, though.
Most likely yourself. I mean, if you're putting yourself in that situation, you ain't going to come out okay.
No.
So,
All right.
with that being said, that terminates the first edition of the high-quality tax return podcast. We'll be attempting to put these out somewhat regularly, maybe every couple weeks, maybe every week. Kind of depends on the amount of things going on out there, whether that be politically, scientifically, or just whether we even have time for it, really. But aside from that, we appreciate you listening wherever you're at, and hope you'll tune in for the next edition of high-quality podcast action.
Have a high quality St.